Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rangers Reviews morning briefing on Thursday, the 20th of April. I am in place of Derek Clark in the hosting chair today with Derek Clark, and I believe as well, potentially, there he is, Johnny McFarlane as well.
Oh, sorry.
That was very on time, Johnny. I didn't know if you were going to be joining us. Was just introducing my guest for the day. In place of Derek Clark, who is, I believe, Johnny, enjoying a well-earned day off somewhere.
He is. Goodness knows where he'll be. I'm looking at my window and the sunlight's streaming in. So it's certainly a lovely day up here in Glasgow. What it'll be like down in the north of England, who knows? But wherever he goes, regardless of the weather, Derek will be carrying his Factor 50.
You will, yeah, you will, absolutely. And just a quick reminder before we get into the podcast, folks, as you know by now, brought to you by Seneca, number one place for hair restoration in the whole of Europe. Treated over 43,000 people today. All the links are in the description. Remember as well, you can subscribe at the moment, just 50p for 2 months on the website. Right, let's get into it, guys, because I think the main talking point of the day, obviously, where there's no midweek game, has been filled by the kind of discussion around recruitment. Michael Beale was on TalkSport yesterday morning, and we'll get into some of those comments. But Chris, you've got a piece out this morning which is on the website, and I'll stick it in the comments below. And that's the manager kind of discussing the importance of recruitment, of data and recruitment, but also I think something he's emphasised a lot about going to meet players face to face, going to get a kind of accounts of players on the ground. Tell us a bit about that and what your kind of general feel is of Michael Beale's chat about recruitment at the moment, because he's talking about it a lot.
I think what you can take from it is he's a very modern coach, but has a slightly more old-fashioned approach to some aspects of it. He was asked about the use of data and that type of thing in his recruitment, and he said, yes, you use that to back up your view of a player. You look at the numbers, you'll study all the stats on it, but your eye can tell you straight away whether a player is going to be a potential fit or whether it's someone you can just write off. He used the examples of Kamara, Bassey and Joe Aribo. You look at those players where they were at their time in their careers. Bassey also played for Leicester B. Who would have picked him out as a potential Rangers signing if you hadn't seen him in that game at Auchenhowie? Glenn Kamara, in and out of the Dundee team, his numbers wouldn't have been that good. You say, well, if he can't get a game for Dundee, he's not going to do for Rangers. But you go and look at him and you say that's how he's going to fit into the side. So I think it's really interesting how Michael's actually going about it. I think it tells you a lot about the personal touch that he likes as well. He spoke during January about wanting to sit in front of Raskin and Cantwell and get their feeling for the club. He spoke about like asking the more senior guys in the dressing room, like Tav and Conor Goldson, look, I'm going to go and sign Tom Cadwell. Do you think this is a good move? So he does seem to take in lots of various aspects. It's not just a fancy signing him. Let's go and do it. And I think that bodes well for the summer. As you were saying before we came on here, Josh, if he can sign another 4 or 5 that make the impact that Cantwell and Raskin have, Rangers might just be onto something next season.
Yeah, well, Johnny, I mean, it's obviously been a real topic of conversation over the last couple of weeks because of Ross Wilson going. Michael Beale on TalkSport yesterday was speaking about how he'll be the driver for recruitment in the short term, emphasising that a lot of these plans have been in place since November. But I just think if we look at, Chris's article with him, but also the TalkSport interview yesterday where he's speaking about every spare minute he's going to meet players face to face. He spoke about this in January and how he went to meet Cantwell and Raskin before he signed them. And it ties into what he was speaking about, players growing and not shrinking in front of Ibrox. What do you make of his quite outward approach to how he's going to recruit players? Because it seems like, as Chris is saying, he's not only looking at numbers to back things up and consulting players, he's trying to, as he said in Chris's piece, do a whole 360 of players, because he knows that, as it was in January, Rangers need to get these signings right as they transition into the next period.
Well, it's just good management, isn't it? And you can never guarantee that signings are going to come in and hit the ground running. We all thought when we looked at Aaron Ramsey that was a gamble worth taking, or certainly I think most people did. Amad Diallo, a £30 million Manchester United player, that looked like a gamble worth taking. It didn't work out. Sometimes things that look good on paper, it doesn't quite spark. And that's especially true at a club like Rangers, where there's very, very specific demands, very, very specific type of games that they're going into, that sometimes will mean that very good players won't quite fit. We talked about Cedric Itten yesterday. Yeah. You look at Cedric Itten's form in Switzerland and you'd be saying, well, that's a guy that Rangers could really do with. 31 games, 18 goals and 11 assists. But we all know that Cedric Itten just didn't show enough to suggest that he could be a Rangers player. Some players fit into that, the demands of the club very, very easily, and some just don't. Mm-hmm. And if you've been around the block a little bit like I have, like Chris has, Josh, you're still a young pup, but you've seen a lot of players through the years that have come in with pedigrees, some international players, and it just hasn't worked out. So the absolute basic bottom line for Michael Beale is he has to minimise as much risk as he possibly can. Never totally minimise it, but what you can do is absolutely make sure that every single duck is in a row. So when it comes to a player not perhaps quite working out, then you can say, well, I did everything I possibly could in the run-up to making that signing. What I would say is Michael Beale has done a bloody good job on the basis of Cantwell and Raskin. Those two look the part, don't they? So if he can get another 3 or 4 like that, I think Rangers will be rocking and rolling in a much better position next season. But that's not easy, especially with the kind of budgets that are available. We know that Rangers, despite the fact that they're going to spend a bit in this summer, don't have, unlimited wealth to go out and splash the cash on £7-8 million players or whatever. It's going to have to be a bit of bobbing and weaving. I would expect a few players to go. I've been thinking about this a lot in the last little while, Josh, and it'd be interesting to get Chris's take on it and your take on it as well. I think you start to look at realising some of your assets, and that might involve some pain. Is Yanis Hadji going to get a game? Could you go to Galatasaray and get £3-4 million in for him? Glenn Kamara, obviously, I think everyone expects to go. Ben Davies, a player who's come in. I like Ben Davies. I think he adds a lot against smaller teams because he uses the ball well and he moves it quickly. He's left-sided. But, here's a player who's done really well in the Championship in the past at a high level. He's played at Liverpool. He's going to be in demand in England if Rangers make him available for transfer. Could you get back £3.5-4 million that you paid for him? I don't see why not. It may well be that there's a bit of a turnover in that regard to kind of generate the funds to ensure that Rangers have got the amount of cash they need to bring in quite a few new players. And added to that, I would expect, obviously, serious work to be done in the Bosman market. I did put this to Michael Beale at the press conference I was at last week that you couldn't attend, Josh. He had 9 signings for QPR, 4 were Bosmans and 5 were loans. So he's someone used to ducking and weaving in that kind of market, and I would expect more of the same. And he specifically brought up the idea of a development loan akin to what they did with Malik Tillman. So again, I think that'll be another one. We'll see those type of players popping in. How many? I don't know. It certainly worked with Tillman. It certainly worked with Ryan Kent. Didn't really work with Ovi Ejaria, although I think his career since shows you he is a player that could have had an impact if he'd maybe had a bit more appetite for the hurly-burly of Scottish football.
Well, Chris, I'll put that back to you because Michael Beale said, I think before the last Old Firm, that kind of left it open, saying these games, these last few weeks of the season will decide a few futures. And I think that comment caught attention because with a lot of players, I think there's been a real loyalty he's had to them. You think back to starting Lundstrom and Kamara in the League Cup final, and even speaking about not changing it at halftime, kind of the narrative of sticking by your men. But do you think, as Johnny suggests, because everyone here knows that I think there's clear signs of what Michael Beale's doing that are really positive. I think the recruitment from what he's had in January looks really good, but also, if he goes 5 games without winning an Old Firm, if he doesn't go win at Hampden, it starts to become difficult as well because it's just the nature of managing Rangers. So do you think that, as Johnny says, a lot of futures that maybe we haven't considered will still be up in the air because Beale knows that ultimately you need results?
I think almost everybody in that squad is in effect playing for the future. I made this point to a couple of guys a wee while ago and mentioned it again to someone on Saturday. if you said to the fans, how many members of that squad would you desperately want to hold on to? If you said, look, there's money on the table, take it or leave it, how many would you actually hold? You'd also keep Cantwell, you'd keep Raskin. Apart from that, almost everybody's up for sale. You'd want to also keep Tillman if you could. You'd also keep Tavernier as captain. I think most people would want Golson to stay. Apart from that, if somebody said, look, Barisic will leave, or Lundstrom will leave, or a Scott Wright, or a Hadji, there's not that many guys in the squad that the fans would be heartbroken. I think when it comes to the older guys like McGregor, Jack, Arfield, Davis, you'd be sad to see them go for sentimental reasons just because of the journey they've been on and what they've done for the club. But a lot of the other guys, I don't think you'd really fight tooth and nail to hold on to. So I think if the manager wants a really, really big overhaul, he could do it and not really upset that many people within the support. I think some of them are interesting in terms of the names that Johnny mentioned. Ben Davies, I think if you can get your money back, I'd probably take it. Lundstrom, I think you probably get a decent, not a huge fee for, but you get something back. I don't think you'd lose money on a couple of them. So I think it's interesting. There's so much talk about the guys that are out of contract, and that will obviously free up huge amounts of wages by the time McGregor retires. I see Davis probably goes. Obviously, Kent and Morelos go. That saves a lot. If you can then offload Roof and Hollander and the guys that aren't contributing at all, there's a big chunk of money there if a Rangers to go and reinvest in terms of wages. Sellable assets, you're really looking at Kamara, Hadji, and that's probably it in terms of guys that you can go and make a bit of money on. So I think there's a lot of decisions to be made there, and it depends on how big an overhaul the manager really wants. Does he just want to let the free contract guys go, replace them, and bring in a couple, or is he going to start trying to offload the guys that are still under contract as well?
And I guess, Johnny, when he's speaking about 4 or 5 players, and that's the kind of number that's banded around quite a lot, I think people, they have a rebuild in their head, and 4 or 5 doesn't corroborate with the type of turnover they want to see. But it's probably important to remember that if you were to get, say, 4 or 5 Raskin or Cantwell-esque signings where they're young, ready to hit the ground running, they've got the personality to succeed here, Beale's done all his background to make sure that they're going to succeed to the extent that he can. Obviously, he can't actually play the games for them. And then maybe, as Chris suggests, or you suggest, there's a couple of development loans in there. Then very quickly, if you consider Raskin and Campbell in that starting 11, the starting 11 does look very different to when Michael Beale came in. You're talking about almost a complete new starting 11 with maybe a little bit more change in the background. And that's probably the most realistic of events this summer, because I don't think it's going to be 15 players in and 15 players out, is it?
Well, I mean, the one thing Michael Beale keeps saying, which is a caveat that not many people have kind of picked up on, is he's talking about 5 players, but we'll also be covering players who are leaving.
Yeah.
And I suspect, and this is the point I was trying to make when I initially mentioned this about players like Hadji and Ben Davies, I think more people might leave than we are expecting. Mm-hmm. And I think there's also more money that can be generated from that potentially than people realise. It's obviously no huge assets like there was when Rangers had Calvin Bassey, Nathan Patterson in the squad. There's no one like that where you can realise an enormous amount of cash right now. There's talent there that down the line that could maybe happen with. You think about someone like Alex Lowry, like Raskin, and like Cantwell. Obviously, there's talent coming through the system. I think another one to watch out for is Leon King. I know that there's been a lot of interest down south throughout the last 3 or 4 years in Leon King. He's, I think, got more minutes than any other player in the Champions League under a certain age. I think it's under 20 this season. So he's had a lot of experience, and it may well be, given the situation now, that extends to those Premier League clubs where they can't go and get the cream of the crop in terms of young talent from Italy, from France since Brexit, like they used to. Mm-hmm. It may well be a Premier League club looks at Leon King and thinks 2.5 million for Leon King. That's an absolute snip. It's equivalent to Rangers spending 250 grand, given the budgets that are floating about down there. So maybe that's one where actually more money than he sort of brings to the squad in terms of quality right now could be realised. Whether or not that'll happen or not, I don't know. But I look at Leon King and I think, does Michael Beale fancy Leon King? He's not played all that often. I think Rangers have had some serious issues around their centre halves. I know he's had a few injuries, but I think under Giovanni van Bronckhorst, there was a clear pathway to the first team for Leon King. He was someone that was very much part of the plans. I'm not getting the impression that there's quite so much conviction under the Beale management than there was. So these are all areas where you can make inroads. I also think Tom Lawrence back and fit is a huge, huge addition. I think he would have provided significant goals and assists for Rangers. If you look at what he achieved in his first, I think, 5 games, it was I can't remember the exact stats. Josh, maybe you'll remember.
I think it was like 2 goals and 3 assists, and he started well. I guess the thing is though, Johnny, how does he? You know, it's his first serious injuries. What is Tom Lawrence 29, 30 now?
Yeah.
Don't know how much that plays into it, but you're right. He was a player who looked like he was going to be able to impact things, and a big personality that's been lost in the pitch.
The thing he brings, Josh, is he can have a ping from 30 yards, which there's no one else really in the squad. Maybe Yanis Hadji, but doesn't do it that often. You could see Tom Lawrence, even in those early games, was capable of bypassing a defence with a really accurate, venomous shot. So I think that brings a lot to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, we were just speaking off air just before we came onto the podcast. You know, we're looking ahead to the summer with this game coming up in a week and a half, just under a week and a half at Hampden. Michael Beale speaking on TalkSport was kind of acknowledging just how big it is in the scope, not only of this season, but also for what he's trying to build. I mean, how many parallels is there to this time last season when, you know, Rangers, I think, were just about, but by the time they went to Hampden, they just reached the semi-finals of Europe. But it was very much, if they don't win that game, Celtic are going to win the treble. Gio had lost that lead in the league. How much does Michael Beale need a big performance to really get, not even so much get everyone on board, but I think really ramp up the excitement levels, that not only can he tick all the boxes of winning games domestically, recruiting exciting players, setting out the vision, but also ultimately go and do what everyone cares about more than anything, win Old Firm games.
I think the performance next weekend is all but irrelevant. It's all about the result. Michael just has to win an Old Firm game. He has to show that he can beat Celtic, because ultimately, if you're a Rangers manager that can't beat Celtic, you won't be here for very long because you're not used to it. I think Michael gets a free pass in terms of the Premiership. Also, the situation that he inherited, it was gone when he came in. I think if he can somehow get the gap down to 9 by winning the Ibrox Old Firm game, you can say, well, we've matched Celtic toe for toe in the Premiership since I came in. He has to win the Scottish Cup game though, because ultimately, if he doesn't, the treble is, if you like, 2/3 his fault, because he lost the League Cup final under his watch, and they would then lose the Scottish Cup under his watch. I think he has to get something. I think the performance in the Ibrox game was good in spells. Also, the Hampden game wasn't. Parkhead was okay in spells. He needs to find a way to raise that, make it more consistent over 90 minutes. But ultimately, he has to find a way to beat Celtic, because I think the gap between the Old Firm and the rest is so wide now. The league title next season could easily come down to the 4 Old Firm games. Celtic and Rangers, week after week, they're churning out results, and it's not like going to Pittodrie, like going to Easter Road, they're going to Livy, they're going to all the other tricky grounds that you think, oh, there might be a wee chance here, and they're blowing teams away. Rangers going to Easter Road, just emphatic win. Celtic heading down to Killie the weekend, plastic pitch, all that, 4-0 up inside 20 minutes. The gap between the Old Firm and the rest is that big now. That being able to put together the type of run that Rangers have done, as impressive as it has been under Michael, ultimately it's going to come down to the Old Firm games. If they'd won the 2 Old Firm games, they would have maybe had a shot at a title. They've not, and that's why they don't have that chance. So I think he has to prove that he can beat Celtic, has to prove that the team is on the right track. Of course, it's going to be a very different side next season, but I think just for him, you can't afford to go into next season having not won an Old Firm game, having had that many cracks at it, and lost twice at Hampden.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll move on, because I also want to speak about a Rangers TV interview that Harry Watling did this morning or last night, and the kind of main talking point from it was Todd Campbell, just a quick quote to read out from it, saying, I think he really gets it. You can see how he plays the game. He plays with a real purpose, takes the ball anywhere in the pitch, shows a real bravery. which I think for a club as big as ours, that's actually quite difficult to do. Johnny, obviously, big games, as Chris is suggesting there, big games is where Rangers players are made at Ibrox. But I think what you are seeing with Cantwell so far, and Raskin, again, to go back to that point we mentioned at the top of the show, these players are not going to shrink in front of 50,000. They kind of want to be the main character. That's why I wrote about Campbell after the weekend. Now, I know St Mirren at home, when the league's gone, is, again, not where you're going to make your name as a Rangers player. But I think Cantwell, focusing on him specifically first, his ability to kind of take ownership, that's what I think this team's needed in an attacking sense, especially if you look at the last Old Firm game where they didn't have someone to really decide it. And what do you make of Watling's kind of comments and just Cantwell? I know we spoke about him a fair amount, but just that kind of ownership topic in general and how he's quite quickly become such a key player for Rangers.
Yeah, I heard someone talking the other day about personality on the pitch and how important it is as a Rangers player to establish yourself as having personality. And what was mentioned was the duality of looking at Ben Davies and Todd Cantwell. Now, Ben Davies, I think everyone agrees, is a tidy, useful player. No one's saying that he can't play football or that he's not someone that can't bring something to the table, but he's not really stood out as a Rangers defender, has he? Especially with the kind of money that's been spent. He's not imposing himself on that defence the way, for example, Connor Goldson has. Todd Cantwell, complete opposite. The minute he's come in, he's demanded the ball. He's showcased moments of class. I think you just have to look at the way he drifted past 2 or 3 players for that lovely no-look pass through to Scott Arfield to finish off at the weekend as a moment of magic. He obviously needs to replicate that in bigger games. You need to give him time, though. It's only, 3 months into his tenure. So he definitely needs a little bit of patience. But these are the games where he can really solidify his position. Because Chris is right with what he says about Michael Beale, but it extends to the players as well. If Todd Cantwell has another game where he's effectively anonymous against Celtic, people will start to ask questions about him. And that's just the way it is at Rangers. He's got to perform in that kind of theatre. But I think he is imposing himself on this team. He is showing that he has got the desire to live up to the demands. And we know that these demands are incredible, both on and off the field, in terms of how you live your life and how it affects the way you live your life, living in the goldfish bowl that is Glasgow. It's a cliche, but it's true. And as I said before, we've seen players over the years who have shrunk and players who've puffed out their chest and kind of risen to the occasion. The one that jumps straight to my mind, Chris will remember this well, is Lorenzo Amoruso arriving at Ibrox back in the late 90s. Almost immediately getting a cruciate ligament injury and being out for 8 or 9 months. Was pitched into an Old Firm game. I think he came on as a sub after 20 minutes. I think it was a semi-final of the Scottish Cup, if memory serves me right, and he was basically the best player on the pitch and imposed himself on the game with just obvious personality, and immediately knew a Rangers defender of some standing had arrived. And that's what any new signing needs to do. I think Todd Cantwell, in his own way, has started to do that. But he's on a journey, and that's important. He's not at a destination.
Yeah, Chris, I guess that ties into Raskin as well. I know he's someone that you have great fondness for on the pitch so far, but these players have personality, and I think especially if you compare it to the last, look at Rangers January transfer window. I mean, Ahmad's gone on and been one of the best players in the Championship, but Gio didn't play him after a while. Where you can critique that transfer. Obviously, Ramsey we all know about, but even Zakowski and Sands. It's hard to. We spoke a lot about the director of football model in the last week, and definitely think that's important over the long term. But I think what you're seeing with Beale is the importance of managers having the final say, driving it, however you want to say that, because the hit rate this season compared to last season, when you look at those two players, is very different, isn't it?
I think it goes back to almost what we're talking about at the start. That's where Michael's insistence of sitting down in front of players really comes to the fore. You have to look in someone's eyes and think, well, are they going to be up for it? Are they going to be able to handle all the madness and the chaos and all the things that make Scottish football and make life at Rangers unique, can you handle it? Because lots of players just can't. There's far better players than Rasker and Cantwell have come into Rangers and just thought, what is all this? This is just a bit nuts up here. But that's what makes it great, and that's why we're always invested in it. So I think that's where the manager's insistence of, like, I need to sit in front of you. Michael gets it. People can talk about Rangers. Do you get it? Some people love it. Some people understand it. Some people just want to run a mile from it. And I think we've seen so far in the way that Rasker and Cantwell have handled themselves on the pitch, they're not going to be fazed by the crowd. They've already had a couple of tricky days at Ibrox where the fans are on their team's back after 20 minutes. They don't shy away from that. They still want the ball. They still want to try and bring their influence on the team. I think off the park as well, the two of them have got a wee bit something about them. Both really interesting to speak to. They come in, they don't seem fazed by having to sit and do a broadcast interview and then come and do the Daily Boys and maybe go and do a Sundays, a bit of Rangers TV. They're open, they're honest. Raskin's getting better every time we speak to him, just as his English has improved. And I think the two of them have got that wee X factor. They've got that something about them that suggests, they're going to do well for Rangers, both on and off the park.
Yeah, absolutely. And Johnny, taking it forward to this weekend, we've got tomorrow, obviously, but while we've got both yourself and Chris on, Aberdeen away, obviously, on a points basis, similar to last week, it doesn't matter that much. For a momentum basis, it definitely does. 2 points, really. One, what do you change in the team? Do you bring Kent in? Do you leave that kind of attacking front four, Tillman, Campbell, Sakala, Morels, as it was? And obviously, as well, just looking back, I know the league is gone this season, but casting your mind back to that first game that Beale managed at Aberdeen away, how important has that been in the fact that Rangers have, I think this is, if they win at Aberdeen away, it's their 9th away win in a row, which was the most Gerrard's ever managed. As Beale has said a few times, it's not been normal for Rangers to go and win this repeatedly away from home, even if the standard of the league is poor this season. So how important, looking back, do you think has that been in the domestic record he's set so far outside of Old Firms?
Yeah, that's a huge moment, those 2 goals by Scott Arfield. And I thought Chris's piece on Scott Arfield was interesting. I think a couple of days ago, yesterday actually it was, my days are all merging into one with this small child. And, I had a look at Scott's stats, and he's actually got, I think, 9 goals so far this season. Might be 9. I think 9 goals and 1 assist, so 10 goal contributions. And there's a player who I think is not quite done yet, and maybe some people are writing him off a little bit prematurely because he's still capable of getting on the end of things, and I think still a valuable substitute. That's a good return for a guy who's not played a lot of minutes for me, and someone who I still think has something to give. If it's not at Rangers, I think he'll go and do very well for someone in the Premier League, put it that way. In terms of the game against Aberdeen, I think I've said it before, I know it's not going to be popular. I'd play Ryan Kent if he's fit. I always play Ryan Kent if he's fit, because for me, he's Rangers' most gifted attacking player. And I think against Celtic, you want Ryan Kent in there. Look, I know he played badly. I can't defend his performance against Celtic in the last game, probably not at Hampden either, but we know he's performed against them in the past. And if we're talking about just sheer skill levels, capability of producing something from nothing, there's a few people in the squad that can do what he can do. And we saw that at Ibrox with his gorgeous goal against them, and he scored good goals against Celtic in the past. So I'd get Kent back to get him up to speed for the Old Firm game. I think he's going to be needed in that game. So for me, it's not really a question. I suppose you can bring him on with half an hour to go and affect the same thing, but I'm a fundamentalist when it comes to Ryan Kent. I'm afraid. Yeah. He's one of the best players in Rangers squad. So that's my take on it.
Chris, I'm going to throw that back over to you, Kent, because I feel like I agree with Johnny. I think he has been misprofiled at times. The example I always use is the Hibs game away, where people will only look at goals and assists, and you look at that game, he obviously wins a penalty, one of Rangers' best players in that day. I think his role extends beyond that. Obviously, that's not mutually exclusive with the fact that he does need to score more goals. But going back to what we said a few minutes ago, Beale did say that these Old Firm games, will decide futures. Does that extend to someone like Kent, who we know he's a favourite of him. We know they've worked together for years and years. Did it change your opinion at all? Because I'm not sure if it's changed mine, but certainly there has to be a line where you think, are these players going to decide Old Firm games anymore? Because you have to be ruthless, and Beale will know to be successful, he has to make ruthless decisions. Does that extend to Kent?
I think it probably does. I think the whole Ryan Kent situation is very interesting because you don't want to lose good players for free. Obviously, it's a situation they got away with, if you like, last summer with Connor Goldson. I think people have probably accepted that Alfredo's going to move on, and there'll then be talk of a turn down 16 million or whatever it was, and that's a sore one. I think it's almost sorer for Ryan Kent because of the fee that they paid for him and the expectation that we got of him. I don't think I think he's for the 7 million, for the money, for the investment. He's been a very good player for Rangers. But I think he can still be a good player for Rangers going forward. Morelos, I'm kind of at the end of the road with. If he moves on, it's thanks, but off the pop almost. I think Kent can be really influential in a Beale team going forward. And if he does move on and you lose him for free, I think that one will sting with the fans a wee bit more. I don't think a Hampden non-performance will then change Michael Beale's mind, and he'll say, well, I was going to offer Ryan something, but he didn't play that well against Celtic. We'll just take it off the table. It's a bigger picture in terms of their relationship and also their time together. But I think Ryan can certainly do with an Old Firm performance. It's been a while since he's produced almost a 90-minute one. He's got these wee spells, but that almost sums up his entire season. It's fits and starts, it's moments, it's wee things that you latch onto thinking, right, that's going to be the spark. That's what he can still do. If he could just do it a bit more often, what a player he would be and what an asset Rangers would have. So I think he needs a performance next weekend. In terms of Aberdeen, I think it just depends on his fitness. If there's any risk at all with him or anybody else in the squad, Aberdeen away is not the time to be risking them. And if Rangers could win the game in a slightly less dramatic fashion, not quite as late, and save the press boys as much heartache and as stress this time, it would be much appreciated. So that's my only instruction for them for the weekend, because that December night was a bit frantic.
3 rewrites in 5 minutes. That's why you're paid the big bucks, Chris. That's why. And just finally, Johnny, paid comment here from Andrew. Always very appreciative of those. Speaking about value for money, Hatate, Kyogo, Maeda, Iwata, and I guess you'd extend that to the small fees that are comparatively paid for Raskin and Campbell. This will be Beale's focus, as you rightly said. Rangers don't have loads and loads of money. Andrew's saying that value doesn't exist within England. Cantwell, I guess, is I know wage-wise maybe not in that category, but he was someone that was out of contract in the summer. Value for money is key as anything for Beale when he's looking ahead to this summer, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got my criticisms of operating so heavily in the English market. I think Rangers tend to, and have tended to under Ross Wilson, focus too much on it. We know there's value there, so you can't dismiss it entirely. I think Joe Aribo is an outstanding signing, for example. Cantwell, Bassey
as well.
Bassey, Cantwell's looking like he's going to be a great signing. So clearly that there is opportunities there, but it's a heavily, heavily competitive market. We know that. There's an awful lot of eyes on it, and these eyes on every league, and that's only got more intense since Brexit. I mentioned it earlier about the effects that's going to have. Scotland's got a much more lax policy when it comes to bringing players in, and actually, in some ways, it's made it easier for clubs in Scotland to go out and sign players. You see that with Aberdeen, the way they've moved to get Miovski, for example, in. That would have been more complex previously, I think, but now you can go out and get a Bernabe, for example, from South America, where I think that would have been more difficult in the past. Down south, it's much more difficult for them to bring in players. So it's that means, I think, domestically, especially looking down their leagues, there's going to be a lot more players like Ivan Toney and Ollie Watkins who are going to get snapped up early doors before they take that accelerated boost that those two took with Brentford, for example. Somebody might be nipping in when Toney was at Portsmouth and taking a chance on him a bit earlier for these reasons. So I do think Rangers need to be a little bit more active in markets where you're getting serious value for money. I always liked Croatia as a market. Scandinavia is a good market. And I feel like too often the signings tend to be coming from from England, frankly. And I don't have a problem with that, the odd one, but I just don't see where the logic in it is in it over a longer period. I think these other leagues that I've mentioned are a much better place to go and pick up high quality technical talent right at the start of their career. And you see Celtic have used the Japanese market, and let's be honest, Celtic didn't have a Scooby about the Japanese market before Ange Postecoglou came in. You know, that's the one manager they've gone and got that's come in and redefined how they're approaching transfers. You know, he's going all over the world, and certainly I'd like to see Rangers to some extent replicate that. And I'm sure under Michael Beale, as he talked about in the TalkSport interview yesterday, is going to make sure that he's covering all bases when it comes to transfers, and that the recruitment team are casting a net far and wide, because there is value, but you need to look at value markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Johnny, Chris, thanks very much for your time this morning. Remember, folks, you can subscribe to the website at the moment for just 50p. Loads of content on there for you as ever. And of course, the press conference day as well. We'll have full coverage of that tomorrow. Until then, thanks very much for your company. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we'll speak